Now that we have all of our pieces made, we've got a pile of this beautiful fabric. It's time to assemble our sweater. So we're going to start. I'll take the sleeve pieces and put them aside. I haven't woven in my ends yet because I just like to do it all together at the end. But I'm going to take my sleeve pieces and put them aside. And now I need my front and my back. And you want the side with the neck hole, so the neck shaping. Remember, the back has less shaping than the front, so the back will be a little bit higher on the neck than the front is. I'm just going to lay them out like this. It doesn't really matter which side the back and the front is on right now. We're just going to lay them out so that we can sew them. So we're going to sew these shoulder sections together, and the back and the front should have the same length for the shoulder sections. So we're just going to sew these together. I'm going to move my camera down here. So I've experimented a little bit with different ways you can join, and the two methods that I like best for this sweater are either the whip stitch or a single crochet from the inside. So I will demonstrate both of those, and you can pick whichever one you like better. So I'll start with the whip stitch. So you need a tapestry needle and just whatever yarn you made your sweater with. Load that up. And so I have both sides of my sweater, again with the right sides up, facing each other. So we'll just start at one side, insert my needle in the first stitch on one side and the first stitch on the other side, and pull through. Just try and pull through enough that you can make it across this whatever seam you're sewing. And now, so my end came out this side, I'm just going to go over the top, insert my hook in the next stitch on this side and the next stitch on that side, and pull it through. So I'll have this loop of thread that goes over the top. So now I'm going to go over the top again, through the next stitch and the next stitch. And you'll just do this all the way across, over the top. So just sewing it together one stitch at a time. And I have these stitches create lines over the top, and that kind of mimics the look of the Tunisian full stitch a little bit, and so that's why I like whip stitch for this project. I'll show you in a minute what it looks like laid flatter. So this is the whip stitch. You can see it makes these bars across. I'll do a couple more stitches so you can see it better. And when you're doing this, you can kind of adjust your tension a little bit so that your stitches are about the same size as your Tunisian full stitches, and that again will also help it look more like it matches the rest of the fabric for your sweater. You just don't want to make them too loose because it will support the weight of the sweater, and especially if you're using this Wims Merino, it is pretty heavy. So you don't want it to be too loose or you'll get stretched out stitches, and that will just kind of look funny. Okay, so this is what the whip stitch looks like. So this is one option for joining your sweater. Creates a pretty nice seam. It mimics the full stitch pretty well, so I like this one. And now I'll show you the other option, which is to slip stitch on the inside of your sweater. And this one is nice because you don't need a tapestry needle, and you don't need to try and figure out how long of yarn you need to sew that section together. So let me undo this here, and then I will show you the other way. Okay, so now we need the same size hook, so a J hook or a 6mm hook. You can just use your Tunisian hook that you used for the rest of your project, but I find it easier to just grab a regular crochet hook because it's a little bit smaller, so it's the same size. Now to set up for the crochet, I want the right side, the outside of my fabric, and the other one laying on top. So this is the back side of my other side, and I'm just sandwiching them here. So these are my necklines line up here, and my shoulders line up here. So I've got the front of my sweater facing the inside, and the back of my, or the inside of my sweater is the side I'm working along right now. And that's just so that the ridge that I create when I crochet is going to be hidden on the inside of the sweater when I wear it. So We'll start with a slip knot to get our hook ready. Now again, we're going to just start in the first stitch on each side. Insert your hook on the first stitch on one side and the first stitch on the other side. Yarn over and pull the loop through all those loops. And then we'll just go along to the next stitch, and the next stitch, yarn over and pull through both the stitches and the loop on your hook. So in the next stitch, and again I'll do a few of these and then I'll open it up so you can see what it looks like. So this is very simple, it's just slip stitching through both sides of your fabric. Okay, so that's far enough. I'll open this up now so you can see what it looks like with this join. So again, I think that makes a pretty nice seam. It's not super obvious and the back isn't super bumpy, so it's not going to be irritating when you wear it. So this is an option if you don't want to do the tapestry needle, you can just slip stitch them together on the seams. So the first seams that we're going to do is we're going to finish both of these shoulders. I think I'll probably just keep doing this slip stitch since I'm halfway done here. So I'm going to slip stitch this shoulder, and then I'll slip stitch this shoulder, and then I will show you the next step. And my seam was a little bit puckered here, and that's just because I crocheted it a little bit tight. If you do your single or your slip stitches a little bit looser, then it won't be puckered on the edge. So now that we have our shoulder seams, as you can see here, we've got our neck hole hanging out. We've got two seamed shoulders. Now the next step is going to be to add our arms. So if you're doing the whip stitch method or sewing on by hand with a tapestry needle, then you'll lay it again with the outside of your sweater facing up, and you'll get a sleeve. You'll want to mark the middle of your sleeve so that you can line it up with the seam that we just made on your shoulder. So I've marked the middle of my sleeve, and I'm going to mark, just attach it to the middle of my seam there. Now you have choices. You can either count rows on each side so that it attaches in the same places on your sweater, or you can just sew it on and assume it's going to be close enough. So you're just going to sew all along this seam right here. And then you'll do the same on the other side. So since I did my shoulder seams with the slip stitch, I'm actually going to turn this over so that I can slip stitch the arm on also. So if you're doing the slip stitch, you want to work from the back. If you're doing the whip stitch, you'll work from the front, but you'll do the same thing for either one. So I'm going to crochet this on, and then I'll crochet the other side on, and then we'll meet back and show you the next step. Okay, so now we should have something that looks kind of like this. We've got our two shoulder seams sewn together, and on each side we have the long edge, the wide edge of one of our sleeves. So here's my narrow part where the cuff will be. Here's the wider part at the top. So I've got that sewn on both sides now. So now we just have two seams left. And again, I'm going to keep my sweater inside out because I am doing these slip stitches. So I'm going to fold my sweater up, and now it's starting to look like an actual sweater, which is kind of cool, an inside out sweater. But you can see these, oh, I just lost my stitch marker. You can see the sleeves here. They'll fold in half like this. And now they don't seem quite so huge. And they connect to the body of the sweater here. So our last seam needs to come all the way from this cuff edge, sewing this flap together, all the way down here, and then we'll turn this corner and just sew all the way down the side of the body until you get to the end. So you're going to do this on both sides. You can start here, you can start down here or at the cuff, either way is fine. You're going to sew all the way along the body edge, and then when you get to where the arm meets, you'll just sew all the way along the arm edge, all the way to the cuff. And then once we're done with this seam on each side, then we'll be ready to add the ribbing onto the bottom edge, the cuff edges, and the neckline. So we are getting close. So I'm going to add those two seams. And again, whatever way you were stitching, whether you're doing the whip stitch or the single crochet, or sorry, the slip stitch, just keep doing it however you were doing it. You can see the front side of my sweater here where I did this seam. And I forgot to say on the last video, I said you could count rows down, and so I just did 1 row on the body per stitch on the arm. So I just started, since my arm started with 71 stitches, I counted 35 rows from the seam and started 35 rows this way, and I worked all the way along the seam. So I have 35 rows center stitch and 35 rows for a total of 71. So that is the shoulder seam. Got 2 shoulder seams. And now we just need to do the body seam. So I'll show it to you with the sweater right side out in case you want to see it that way. We've got our neckline, which of course isn't finished because we're going to add ribbing. So if you try this on right now, it's going to be really wide, and maybe you like it that way, but just know that it's going to get narrower because we're going to add neckline ribbing. So again, our last seam here is going to sew the side of our sweater from the end all the way up to the armpit, and then all the way over to the cuff in one continuous join. Now, if you're doing the whip stitch, it's not a great idea to take one strand of yarn that's that long and pull it through each stitch because it can wear the yarn out. So I'd recommend working in sections if you're doing the whip stitch. If you're doing the slip stitch join, then that's not an issue and you can just do it continuously. So